Hello everyone, I am MANO Scaling, and I am here to help you today. I know you use this video to fall asleep, so before that, please like the video and subscribe to the channel, and also tell me where you are from and what time you are watching. Now get comfortable and relax. My name is Marcus Thompson, and I am 34 years old. This happened in October 2023. The plan was simple enough, a weekend hiking trip to reconnect with nature and escape the suffocating routine of my accounting job in Atlanta. I'd chosen the remote trails around Tallulah Gorge State Park, specifically the less traveled paths that wound deep into the Chattahoochee National Forest. What I didn't expect was to meet Sarah Mitchell at the trailhead parking lot, struggling with an overloaded backpack while her golden retriever, Copper, wagged excitedly around her feet. "First time solo camping?" I asked, watching her wrestle with tent poles that had somehow tangled themselves into an impossible knot. She looked up, brushing auburn hair from her face, revealing green eyes that held both determination and uncertainty. "That obvious?" She laughed, but there was a nervous energy beneath it. "I'm Sarah, and this is Copper. We're attempting to prove we don't need anyone to have an adventure." Something about her fierce independence mixed with vulnerability struck me. Maybe it was the way she talked to her dog like he was her closest confidant, or how she mentioned this was her first trip since her divorce. Either way, when she mentioned taking the same trail system I'd planned, it seemed natural to suggest we hike together, for safety, of course. "I'm Marcus," I said, extending my hand. "And honestly, these mountains can be tricky even for experienced hikers. Mind if we team up?" Her relief was palpable. "I was hoping you'd ask." We set off on the short line trail, which would take us deep into the wilderness toward Tate Branch Falls. The October air was crisp, filled with the earthy scent of decomposing leaves and pine needles. Copper bounded ahead, his golden coat catching the dappled sunlight that filtered through the canopy above. Sarah was chatty at first, telling me about her job as a veterinarian, how she'd always wanted to do more outdoor activities, but her ex-husband had been the type who preferred hotels to tents. He said camping was for people who couldn't afford real vacations, she said, her voice carrying a bitter edge. "Guess that makes me officially poor now." I found myself genuinely enjoying her company. She had a dry sense of humor and wasn't afraid to admit when she was out of her element. When we stopped for lunch near a small creek, she confessed she'd never actually used her water purification tablets before. "You just drop them in and wait?" she asked, holding the small tablet like it might explode. 20 minutes, I confirmed, trying not to smile at her concentrated expression as she timed it on her phone. That's when we first noticed something was off. Her phone showed 2:17 p.m., but mine displayed 4:43 p.m. We laughed it off initially. One of our phones must have glitched, but when we compared them to my GPS device, the time jumped again, showing 3:28 p.m. "That's weird," Sarah said, frowning at her screen. "I swear I just looked at this 5 minutes ago." Copper had stopped drinking from the creek and was staring into the woods. His ears perked forward in that focused way dogs get when they hear something humans can't. A low whine escaped his throat. "What is it, boy?" Sarah called, but Copper didn't move, didn't even acknowledge her voice. The forest around us had gone completely silent. No bird songs, no insect buzzing, no rustling of small animals in the underbrush. Just an oppressive quiet that seemed to press against our eardrums. "We should keep moving," I said, though I couldn't explain the sudden urgency I felt. The trail began to climb more steeply as we moved deeper into the forest. According to my map, we should reach our planned campsite near Tate Branch Falls within another hour. But as we hiked, the trail markers became increasingly difficult to find, and the path itself seemed to shift slightly each time I looked away and back. "Are you sure we're going the right way?" Sarah asked after we'd been walking for what felt like 2 hours without seeing any familiar landmarks. I checked my GPS again, but the screen showed nothing but static. "That's impossible," I muttered, tapping the device. "This thing has never failed before." Sarah tried her phone again. No signal, which wasn't surprising this deep in the mountains, but more troubling was that her phone now showed a date of October 18th, 3 days in the future. "This has to be some kind of electronic malfunction," she said, but her voice had lost its earlier confidence. Copper had been acting increasingly strange, stopping frequently to sniff the air or stare into the trees with an intensity that made my skin crawl. Dogs have senses we don't, and whatever he was picking up clearly had him spooked. As the afternoon wore on, the forest seemed to grow darker despite it being too early for sunset. The trees pressed closer together, their branches forming a canopy so thick that only scattered beams of light penetrated to the forest floor. The temperature had dropped noticeably, our breath now visible in small puffs as we walked. "There," Sarah pointed ahead to a small clearing beside a creek. "That looks like a good spot to set up camp." It wasn't the location I'd planned, but with the navigation issues and the failing light, it seemed like our best option. The clearing was roughly circular, surrounded by towering pine trees that creaked ominously in a wind I couldn't feel at ground level. Setting up camp went smoothly enough, though I noticed Sarah kept glancing around nervously as she worked with her tent stakes. Copper refused to venture more than a few feet from her side, which was unusual for a dog who'd been so energetic earlier. "He's probably just tired," Sarah said when I mentioned it, but she didn't sound convinced. I got a fire going using the abundant dry wood scattered around the clearing's edge. The flames crackled to life, casting dancing shadows against the trees and providing a welcome sense of normalcy. We cooked a simple dinner of canned soup and shared stories about our respective escapes from city life. "I keep thinking about what my ex would say if he could see me now," Sarah said, stirring her soup thoughtfully. "Probably something about how I'm proving his point about being irresponsible." "Sounds like you're better off without him." She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "That's what everyone says. But being alone is scarier than I expected. Not just the camping. Everything. I've been having these dreams." She trailed off, staring into the fire. "What kind of dreams?" "Someone calling my name. Always at night, always from somewhere I can't see them. I follow the voice, but I never find who's calling." She shook her head. "Probably just anxiety about the divorce." As full darkness settled over our campsite, the forest sounds should have returned. Owls hooting, small animals rustling through the underbrush, the distant calls of night birds. Instead, the oppressive silence continued, broken only by the crackling of our fire and Copper's occasional whimper. "Do you hear that?" Sarah asked suddenly. I listened carefully but heard nothing beyond our fire. "Hear what?" "Like singing? Very faint." I strained my ears but caught nothing. Copper, however, had lifted his head and was staring into the darkness beyond our fire's light, his tail tucked between his legs. "It's probably just the wind in the trees," I said, though the air around our campsite remained perfectly still. We decided to turn in early, both of us feeling unsettled by the strange atmosphere. I crawled into my sleeping bag fully clothed, keeping my flashlight within easy reach. Across the clearing, I could see the faint glow of Sarah's headlamp through her tent wall as she settled in for the night. Sleep came fitfully. I kept waking to sounds that vanished the moment I became fully conscious. Footsteps circling our campsite, twigs snapping just beyond the dying embers of our fire, and once, what sounded distinctly like someone whispering my name. The third time I woke, my sleeping bag was unzipped. From the inside. I sat up quickly, heart hammering. I distinctly remembered zipping it closed before falling asleep. The zipper was now pulled down nearly to my feet, and the metal pull tab was warm to the touch, as if someone had just been handling it. "Sarah?" I called softly. No response from her tent. I clicked on my flashlight and swept it around the campsite. Everything appeared normal. Our gear was where we'd left it. The fire had died down to glowing coals, and both tents stood undisturbed. But something felt fundamentally wrong, like the air itself was holding its breath. "Sarah," I called again, louder this time. Still nothing. I unzipped my tent and stepped outside. The temperature had plummeted. My breath came out in thick clouds, and frost had formed on the grass despite it being early October. The beam of my flashlight seemed weaker than it should be, barely penetrating the darkness beyond our clearing. Sarah's tent was zipped shut, no light visible inside. "Sarah, are you okay?" I approached her tent cautiously. When I touched the fabric, it was ice cold and slightly damp. I could hear no breathing, no rustling of movement inside. "Sarah," I called urgently, grabbing the zipper. The tent was empty. Her sleeping bag lay unzipped from the inside, just like mine had been. Her gear was still there: backpack, boots, jacket. But Sarah and Copper were gone. I called her name repeatedly, my voice echoing strangely in the still air. The sound seemed to bounce back wrong, as if the forest was changing the shape of my words before returning them to me. That's when I heard it. A faint response, seeming to come from deeper in the woods. "Marcus, help me." It was Sarah's voice, but something about it made my skin crawl. The tone was off, too flat, like someone imitating her speech patterns without understanding the emotions behind them. I grabbed my larger flashlight and headed toward the sound, leaving the relative safety of our campsite. The beam cut through the darkness, revealing trees that seemed to lean in at impossible angles, their bark appearing to writhe and shift in the moving light. "Sarah, where are you?" I called. "Help me," came the response, always seeming to originate from just beyond my flashlight's reach. I followed the voice deeper into the forest, branches catching at my clothes and scratching my face. The ground beneath my feet felt wrong, sometimes soft and yielding like normal forest floor, other times hard as stone, occasionally seeming to pulse as if I were walking on something alive. After what felt like hours of searching, I stopped to catch my breath. My flashlight beam had grown noticeably dimmer, and I realized I'd been walking in circles. The same fallen log, the same distinctively shaped boulder, the same cluster of 3 birch trees. I'd passed them multiple times. That's when I saw her. Sarah stood about 30 feet away, just at the edge of my light's reach. She was facing away from me, perfectly still, wearing the same clothes she'd had on earlier. Copper sat beside her, equally motionless. "Sarah, thank God, I've been looking everywhere for you." She didn't respond, didn't turn around. "Sarah?" I moved closer and my blood turned to ice water in my veins. She was standing in a perfect circle of dead grass, the earth around her feet charred black as if exposed to intense heat. Copper sat at the circle's edge, but as I approached, I realized he wasn't breathing. His golden fur had turned a sickly gray color, and his eyes reflected my flashlight beam like mirrors. "Sarah, we need to get back to camp." Slowly, she began to turn toward me. Her movement was wrong, too smooth, like she was rotating on a fixed axis rather than turning naturally. When she faced me fully, I nearly dropped my flashlight. It was Sarah's face, but her skin had taken on a waxy, artificial quality. Her eyes were completely black, not just the pupils but the entire visible portion, and her mouth was stretched into a smile that was too wide, revealing far too many teeth. "Marcus," she said, but the voice came from everywhere and nowhere, seeming to emanate from the trees themselves rather than her throat. "I've been waiting." I stumbled backward, my mind refusing to process what I was seeing. "You're not, Sarah." "I am now," the thing wearing her face replied. She called out in the dark. So frightened, so alone. She wanted someone to take the fear away. I helped her with that. "Where is she? What did you do to her?" The Sarah thing tilted its head at an angle that would have snapped a normal person's neck. "She's here. She's me. We're together now, the way she always wanted to be with someone." I turned and ran. Branches whipped past my face as I crashed through the underbrush, following what I hoped was the path back to our campsite. Behind me, I could hear laughter that sounded like wind through dry leaves, and occasionally, Sarah's voice calling my name in that same flat, emotionless tone. When I finally burst into our clearing, gasping and bleeding from numerous scratches, I found our camp exactly as I'd left it. My tent stood open, Sarah's tent remained empty, and our gear lay undisturbed. But the fire, which had been nothing but coals when I'd left, was now blazing high again, casting writhing shadows across the clearing. Sitting beside the fire, warming her hands, was Sarah. "Marcus, where did you go? I woke up and you were gone." She looked completely normal, hair slightly mussed from sleep, wearing her jacket over her pajamas, Copper lying contentedly at her feet. I stared at her, trying to detect any sign of the horrible transformation I'd witnessed in the forest. I went looking for you. Your tent was empty." She frowned, glancing back at her tent. "I just went to relieve myself. Copper needed to go out too. We weren't gone more than 5 minutes." Everything about her seemed genuine. The concerned expression, the way she absently reached down to scratch Copper's ears, even the slight shiver as a breeze moved through the clearing. But I couldn't shake the image of those black eyes and that impossible smile. "Are you okay?" she asked, studying my scratched face and torn shirt. "You look like you've seen a ghost." "Just got turned around in the dark," I said carefully. "We went back to our tents, but I didn't sleep. I lay in my sleeping bag, listening to every sound, watching for any sign that the thing in the forest was coming back. Occasionally, I heard Sarah moving around in her tent, and once, I could have sworn I heard her talking to someone in a whisper so low I couldn't make out the words. When morning finally came, Sarah emerged from her tent looking refreshed and normal. She made coffee over our rekindled fire and chatted about the strange dreams she'd had. "I dreamed someone was calling my name," she said, echoing what she'd told me the night before. "But this time, I found them. It was the strangest thing. They looked exactly like me." I watched her carefully as she spoke, looking for any sign of deception or wrongness. Her eyes were their normal green color, her smile was natural, and she moved with her usual gestures and mannerisms. "Maybe we should head back today," I suggested. "This place has some weird energy." "Oh, come on," she laughed. "One spooky night and you're ready to give up. I thought you were more adventurous than that." Her tone was teasing, but something about it felt off. The Sarah from yesterday had been nervous about the camping experience, eager for reassurance. This version seemed almost dismissive of my concerns. "Besides," she continued, "I feel like I'm just getting the hang of this wilderness thing. Copper and I had such interesting dreams last night, didn't we, boy?" Copper looked up at her with those same mirror-like eyes I'd seen in the forest. I made an excuse about needing to check our location on the map and walked to the edge of the clearing. My GPS device, which had been malfunctioning yesterday, now worked perfectly. According to the display, we were nowhere near where we should be. The device showed our location as being deep in an area of the forest that, according to the topographical map, didn't exist. When I looked back at our campsite, Sarah was standing in the same circle of dead grass I'd seen in the forest, though it hadn't been there when we'd set up camp. She was facing away from me, perfectly still, and Copper sat at the circle's edge in exactly the same position as the night before. "Sarah?" She didn't turn around. I approached slowly, my heart rate climbing. "Sarah, we need to leave, now." "Do we?" she asked without turning. "I like it here. It's peaceful. No one judging me, no one leaving me, no one telling me I'm not good enough." "Sarah, please look at me." "I don't think I want to do that." The thing pretending to be Sarah began to turn, and I knew that when it faced me fully, I would see those horrible black eyes again. I ran for my backpack, grabbing only the essentials, water, my knife, the GPS device, and fled the clearing. This time, I didn't look back. I ran through the forest following the GPS coordinates, branches tearing at my clothes and skin. Behind me, I could hear laughter that sounded like Sarah but felt like something else entirely. Occasionally, I heard Copper barking, but the sound was wrong. Too deep, too prolonged, like something imitating the memory of a dog's bark. The forest seemed to actively resist my escape. Paths that should have led downhill curved back upward. Streams I crossed appeared again directly in front of me minutes later. Trees that I'd marked with my knife to track my progress appeared unmarked when I encountered them again. But I kept moving, kept following the GPS arrow that pointed toward the main trail. Hours passed. The sun, when I could see it through the canopy, seemed to move backward across the sky. My water ran out. My legs cramped from the constant uphill climbing that shouldn't have been there. Finally, as the light was beginning to fade again, I heard the most beautiful sound in the world: traffic on a distant highway. I crashed through the final line of trees and found myself at the main parking area of Tallulah Gorge State Park. My car sat exactly where I'd left it, covered in a thick layer of dust as if it had been sitting there for weeks rather than one night. A park ranger was walking toward his vehicle and stopped when he saw me stumble out of the forest. "Sir, are you all right? You look like you've been through hell." I must have looked like a wild man, clothes torn, face scratched and bleeding, covered in dirt and pine needles. "There's someone else in there," I gasped. "A woman and her dog. They're in trouble." The ranger immediately called for backup and organized a search team. I tried to guide them to our campsite, but when we reached the coordinates my GPS showed, there was nothing there. No clearing, no circle of dead grass, no sign that anyone had ever camped in that spot. "Are you sure this is the right location?" the ranger asked, studying his own GPS device. I stared at the dense forest where our campsite should have been. The trees grew close together, their trunks thick and ancient, clearly undisturbed for decades. The search continued for 3 days. They found no trace of Sarah Mitchell or her dog Copper. According to the park records, no one by that name had registered for a camping permit. The veterinarian. My name is Marcus Whitfield, and I am 34 years old. This happened in October 2023. The first sign something was wrong came when my GPS started showing roads that shouldn't exist. We were 3 hours deep into the Chattahoochee National Forest, following what my phone insisted was Highway 180, but the asphalt had given way to gravel, then dirt, then something that barely qualified as a trail. My best friend since college, David Chen, sat in the passenger seat of my Jeep, squinting at his own phone with the same confused expression I probably wore. "This can't be right," David muttered, turning his phone sideways as if a different angle might make the map make sense. "According to this, we should be hitting Brasstown Bald in about 10 minutes, but we've been driving uphill for the past hour." I pulled over at what might generously be called a clearing, really just a spot where the towering pines stepped back far enough to let a vehicle through. The October air bit at my face when I rolled down the window, carrying the scent of decomposing leaves and something else, something foul that made my stomach turn. "Let's just backtrack," I said, already reaching for the gear shift. "We can find another route to the campsite." But when I tried to reverse, the engine sputtered and died. The dashboard lights flickered once, twice, then went dark completely. David and I had planned this trip for months. We were both software engineers, spending our days hunched over keyboards in fluorescent-lit offices, and we'd convinced ourselves that a long weekend camping in the Georgia mountains would somehow reset our souls, or whatever other bullshit we told ourselves to justify escaping our suffocating routines. David had found the campsite online, a private property deep in the national forest, owned by a local family who rented it out to hunters and hikers. The listing promised complete isolation and authentic wilderness experience. It had delivered on both counts, though not in the way we'd hoped. "Pop the hood," David said, already climbing out. He was the practical one between us, the guy who actually knew the difference between a carburetor and a catalytic converter. I was just along for the ride, armed with nothing more useful than a credit card and a vague notion that fresh air was good for you. The hood released with a metallic groan that seemed to echo longer than it should have in the surrounding forest. David disappeared behind the raised metal panel, and I heard him poking around, muttering technical terms I didn't understand. After a few minutes, his voice drifted back to me, tight with confusion. "Marcus, come look at this." I joined him at the front of the Jeep and immediately understood his tone. The engine looked wrong. Not broken, exactly, but as if someone had been inside it, moving things around with no regard for how they were supposed to fit together. Wires had been pulled free from their housings and wrapped around components they had no business touching. The air filter had been removed entirely, and in its place someone had stuffed what looked like handfuls of Spanish moss and dead leaves. "What the hell?" I breathed. David's face had gone pale. "This isn't random vandalism. Someone knew exactly what they were doing. Look," he pointed to where the battery cables should have been connected to the terminals. Instead, they'd been carefully twisted around each other and tucked into the space where the air filter used to be. This is deliberate sabotage, designed to make the car run just long enough to get us stranded. The implications hit us both at the same time. We were at least 20 miles from the main road, with no cell service and no working vehicle. The sun was already starting to sink behind the mountain ridges, painting the sky the color of old blood. "Our phones," I said, pulling mine out. The screen showed no bars, but that wasn't unusual for this deep in the mountains. What was unusual was the time. According to my phone, it was 3:17 a.m. David checked his phone and swore. "Mine says it's 11:43 p.m. What time did we leave Atlanta?" "Around noon," I said, but even as the words left my mouth, I wasn't sure. The day felt stretched, elastic, like trying to remember a dream. We'd packed the car, loaded up on gas station coffee, hit the road. But the details blurred together, and when I tried to focus on any specific moment, it slipped away like water through my fingers. "We need to keep moving," David said, shouldering his backpack. "The campsite can't be more than a few miles ahead. We've got food for 3 days, and I've got a water purification kit." We locked the Jeep, more out of habit than any real hope that it would matter, and started walking. The trail, such as it was, wound deeper into the forest, following what might have once been a creek bed. The trees pressed closer with each step, their branches forming a canopy so thick that even the fading daylight struggled to penetrate it. Our flashlights seemed pitiful against the gathering darkness, creating more shadows than they eliminated. It was David who first noticed the smell. "Jesus, what is that?" He stopped walking and covered his nose with his sleeve. The stench hit me a moment later, a cloying sweetness layered over something rotten, like fruit left too long in the sun mixed with the metallic tang of old blood. It grew stronger as we walked, until breathing became a conscious effort. "Probably just a dead deer," I said, though I didn't believe it. I'd smelled roadkill before, and this was different. This was wrong in a way that made my skin crawl. The trail opened into a clearing, and we found the source of the smell. It had probably been a campsite once. The stone circle that had contained countless fires still stood, though it was now filled with something that definitely wasn't wood. Arranged in a careful pattern around the clearing were what looked like scarecrows, human-shaped figures made from sticks and Spanish moss, dressed in scraps of clothing that might have once belonged to campers or hikers. But as we got closer, our flashlight beams revealed details that made my stomach lurch. The clothes weren't empty. Bones jutted out from sleeves and pant legs, held together by wire and rope. Some of the skulls still had hair clinging to them, and in the center of the clearing, suspended from a sturdy oak branch, hung a fresher addition to the collection. David vomited. The sound seemed impossibly loud in the silence of the forest, and when he finished retching, that silence pressed back in around us like a living thing. "We need to get out of here," I whispered, grabbing his arm. "Right now." But as we turned to leave, David stopped. "Wait, look at that one." He was pointing at one of the scarecrow figures, positioned near what looked like the remains of a tent. This one was different from the others. Newer, the clothes less faded, and there was something familiar about the jacket it wore. A distinctive red windbreaker with reflective strips across the chest. "That's my jacket," David said, his voice barely audible. "I lost it last year when we went camping in North Carolina. I remember because—" He never finished the sentence. Behind us, from the direction we'd come, we heard the sound of someone walking through the underbrush. Slow, deliberate footsteps that seemed to know exactly where they were going. We ran. The trail, already barely visible in daylight, became a nightmare to navigate in the dark. Branches whipped at our faces, roots tried to trip us, and every few yards one of us would stumble into a tree or a boulder that our flashlights had failed to illuminate. Behind us, the footsteps continued at the same measured pace, never hurrying, never falling behind. After what felt like hours but was probably only minutes, we burst into another clearing. This one was different, less wild, more intentionally maintained. A small cabin squatted in the center, windows glowing with warm yellow light. Smoke drifted from the chimney, and we could hear the faint sound of music playing inside. "Thank God," David gasped, already heading for the front door. I grabbed his arm. "Wait, something's not right." "What are you talking about? It's a cabin. People. Help." But I couldn't shake the feeling that we'd walked into a trap. The cabin looked too perfect, too welcoming after the horror we'd just escaped. And there was something about the music. It had an old-fashioned quality, like it was coming from a gramophone rather than a modern sound system. David shook off my hand and knocked on the door. The music stopped immediately, and we heard footsteps inside. The door opened, revealing a woman in her 60s with kind eyes and graying hair pulled back in a bun. She wore a simple house dress and an apron, and she looked at us with the sort of concern you'd expect from someone finding two panicked hikers on her doorstep. "My goodness, you boys look terrible," she said, her voice carrying a soft southern accent. Come in. I'm Martha Henley. You must be the young men who made the reservation." The interior of the cabin was exactly what you'd expect from a grandmother's house. Doilies on every surface, family photos covering the mantelpiece, the smell of baking bread filling the air. It should have been comforting. Instead, something about it made my skin crawl. "I'm sorry," I said, "but we didn't make any reservation. Our car broke down and we've been walking for hours. We just need to use your phone to call for help." Martha smiled, and for just a moment, something flickered across her face. An expression too quick to interpret but wrong enough to make me step backward. "Oh, but you did make a reservation," she said. "David Chen and Marcus Whitfield, party of 2. You're staying in the back bedroom. I've already prepared dinner." David and I exchanged glances. We hadn't told her our names. "How did you—" David started. "Sit down, boys. You must be exhausted." It wasn't a request. Martha gestured toward the dining room table where 2 place settings waited. The plates were already filled with what looked like stew, steam rising from the bowls in the warm air. We sat, mainly because our legs felt too shaky to support us much longer. The stew smelled incredible, rich and hearty with chunks of meat and vegetables in a dark gravy. My stomach growled, reminding me that we hadn't eaten since… when? I couldn't remember our last meal, which seemed strange. Martha disappeared into the kitchen, humming softly to herself. David leaned across the table. "We need to get out of here," he whispered. "This is too weird. How does she know our names? And did you see her face when you said we hadn't made a reservation?" I nodded, but the smell of the food was making it hard to think clearly. When had I last eaten? The question kept circling through my mind, but I couldn't grasp the answer. Martha returned with a pitcher of water and 2 glasses. "Eat up," she said. "You'll need your strength." "For what?" I asked. She smiled again, and this time I caught the full impact of that wrong expression. Too wide, lasting too long, not quite reaching her eyes. "For tomorrow, of course. The real fun starts tomorrow." David pushed his bowl away. "We appreciate the hospitality, ma'am, but we really need to call someone. Our families will be worried." "Oh, I don't think anyone's worried about you boys," Martha said, settling into a chair across from us. "In fact, I don't think anyone remembers you at all." The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. David's face had gone white, and I felt something cold and oily settle in my stomach. "What do you mean?" I asked. Martha's smile widened. Well, you've been here for quite some time already. Weeks, actually. Maybe months. Time gets a bit funny up here in the mountains. People forget things. Faces, names, whether someone ever existed in the first place. I stood up so quickly that my chair toppled backward. You're insane. We just got here tonight. Our car broke down and… Marcus! The voice came from behind me, and I spun around to see David walking through the front door. But David was sitting right next to me at the table. I looked back and forth between them, my brain struggling to process what I was seeing. The David by the door looked exactly like my friend. Down to the same clothes, the same slightly crooked nose from when he'd broken it playing basketball in college. But his eyes were wrong, flat and empty, like looking into a doll's painted features. I found some firewood, the David thing said, setting an armload of logs beside the fireplace. Should keep us warm tonight. The real David, at least I thought he was real, grabbed my arm. What the hell is going on? Martha clapped her hands together like a delighted child. Oh, this is wonderful. Usually it takes much longer for the replacement to settle in. You boys are naturals. The David thing turned toward us, and when it smiled, its teeth were too sharp, too numerous. We should probably get some sleep. Big day tomorrow. What happens tomorrow? I asked, though I was afraid of the answer. Martha's expression turned almost maternal. Why, one of you goes home, of course. Back to Atlanta, back to your jobs, back to your lives. The other one joins my collection. What collection? David whispered. Martha gestured toward the wall behind us, and I realized that what I'd taken for family photos were something else entirely. Dozens of pictures showing pairs of people. Hikers, campers, couples. In each photo, one person looked normal, while the other had those same flat, empty eyes as the David thing. I provide a service, Martha explained. People come to me looking for escape, for something different. I give them exactly what they want. The question is, which one of you wants to go home, and which one wants to stay with me forever? The David thing took a step closer. I think I'd like to go home. I miss the city. Real David grabbed a butter knife from the table. It wasn't much of a weapon, but it was something. Stay back. What are you? I'm you, the thing said simply. Just improved. No more anxiety about deadlines. No more wondering if you're wasting your life. No more existential dread at 3 a.m. Just peace. Wouldn't that be nice? I edged toward the door, pulling David with me. We're leaving, right now. Martha sighed. Oh, boys, you can't leave. You've already been here too long. Look at your hands. I looked down and nearly screamed. My hands were translucent, like looking at them through frosted glass. I could see the table through my palm, the pattern of the tablecloth visible through my fingers. It's the mountain, Martha explained conversationally. It changes things. Time, space, people. The longer you stay, the less real you become. Eventually, you'll fade away entirely unless… She gestured toward the David thing. Unless you let someone else take your place. This is impossible, David said, but his voice lacked conviction. He was staring at his own hands, which showed the same ghostly transparency. Is it? Martha asked. Think about it. When did you last remember being happy? Really, genuinely happy? When did you last feel like your life had meaning? The mountain feeds on that emptiness, that desperate need for something different. It gives you exactly what you asked for, an escape from your ordinary, meaningless existence. The David thing nodded. It's not so bad. No more pain, no more doubt, just eternal peace. And all we have to do is let you take our place, I asked. One of you, Martha corrected. The other gets to go home. Think of it as natural selection. David and I backed toward the door, but when I reached for the handle, my hand passed right through it. I was becoming less solid by the minute. You have until sunrise to decide, Martha said. After that, the choice will be made for you. We stumbled outside into the cold mountain air. Our flashlights flickered weakly, and in their failing light, I could see more of them. Dozens of doppelgangers standing at the edges of the clearing. Men, women, children, all with those same empty eyes, all wearing the faces of people who had probably sat at Martha's table and faced the same impossible choice. "There has to be a way out of this," David said. But he sounded like he was trying to convince himself rather than me. I held up my hand to the moonlight. I could see stars through my palm now, and the sight made my knees weak. "She's right. We're disappearing." "Then we have to decide. One of us takes the doppelganger's place and gets to go home. The other stays." The logic was terrible and inescapable. We were dying anyway, fading away into nothing. This way, at least one of us could survive. "How do we choose?" I asked. David was quiet for a long moment. "I've got Sarah. The wedding's in 3 months. You've got nobody waiting for you." It stung, but he was right. David had a fiancée, a future, a reason to live. I had a job I hated, an empty apartment, and a growing certainty that my best years were behind me. The choice, when I really thought about it, wasn't much of a choice at all. "Okay," I said. "You go home, I'll stay." Something shifted in David's expression. A flicker of relief followed immediately by guilt. "Marcus, I can't ask you to—" "You're not asking, I'm choosing." We walked back toward the cabin where Martha waited on the porch with the David thing beside her. She smiled when she saw us coming. "Have you decided?" "I'll stay," I said. "David goes home." Martha clapped her hands together. "Wonderful. The transformation is quite painless, I'm told." But as we approached the porch, David grabbed my arm. "Wait, look at its eyes." I looked at the David thing more closely and realized what had been bothering me about it all along. The eyes weren't just empty. They were afraid. Something was trapped inside that stolen face, something that had once been human and was now screaming silently behind a mask of flesh. "That's not peace," I whispered. "That's hell." Martha's smile faltered. "Now, boys, don't make this harder than it needs to be." "What happens to the original?" David asked. "When the doppelganger takes someone's place, what happens to the person they're replacing?" "They become part of the mountain," Martha said, but her voice had lost its grandmotherly warmth. "They join the eternal dance of—" "They become prisoners," I interrupted, "trapped inside those things, watching their lives being lived by something else." The David thing's face twitched, and for just a moment, I saw something desperate and human flicker in its eyes. "Run!" it whispered, the word barely audible. "Run, while you still can." Martha's face contorted with rage. "You stupid boys! You could have had peace. You could have had escape." The other doppelgangers began moving toward us, their movements jerky and unnatural, like marionettes controlled by a drunk puppeteer. Some were missing pieces, an arm here, a leg there, and Spanish moss grew from their wounds like supernatural kudzu. David and I ran into the forest, crashing through underbrush that tore at our clothes and skin. Behind us, Martha's voice echoed through the trees, no longer human, no longer even trying to sound human. "You can't escape the mountain," she shrieked. "It already has you. You're already mine." We ran until our lungs burned and our legs gave out, finally collapsing beside a small stream. The water looked black in the moonlight, and when I cupped some in my hands to drink, it tasted of copper and decay. "We're going to die out here," David gasped. I looked at my hands again. They were almost completely transparent now, and I could feel a strange lightness in my chest, as if my heart was forgetting how to beat. "Maybe," I said, "but at least we'll die as ourselves." David laughed, a sound somewhere between hysteria and despair. "Jesus Christ, Marcus! What kind of consolation prize is that?" "The only one we've got." We sat by the stream as the hours passed, watching ourselves fade away inch by inch. I found myself thinking about my life, about all the things I'd never done, all the chances I'd never taken. Maybe Martha had been right about one thing. Maybe I had been looking for an escape from a meaningless existence. But this wasn't the kind of escape I'd had in mind. "Sarah's going to wonder what happened to me," David said. No, she won't. The realization hit me like a physical blow. Martha was right about that part. If we disappear here, completely disappear, then we never existed in the first place. Sarah won't wonder about you because she'll never have met you. David stared at me. That's impossible. Is it? Look around. David. Nothing about this place follows normal rules. Time doesn't work right. Space doesn't work right. Why should causality work right? As if to prove my point, my phone buzzed. I looked at the screen, and my blood turned to ice. The display showed 17 missed calls from Sarah Chen. But according to the call log, she'd been trying to reach Marcus Whitfield, not David. "David," I whispered, showing him the phone. His face went white as he read the display. "That's not possible. Sarah doesn't even know your last name." But as we stared at the phone, I felt memories shifting in my head like sand. Sarah at the coffee shop, laughing at something I'd said. Sarah trying on wedding dresses, asking my opinion. Sarah in bed beside me, her head on my chest as she talked about our future together. "It's changing us," I said. "Our pasts, our My name is Marcus Chen, and I am 34 years old. This happened in October 2023. The rental car's GPS had been acting up for the last 20 miles, flickering between satellite signals as we wound deeper into the Cohutta wilderness of northern Georgia. My girlfriend Sarah sat in the passenger seat, one hand absently stroking our golden retriever Copper's head, while the other traced our route on a paper map we'd picked up at the ranger station. "Turn left at the next fork," she said, squinting at the faded lines. "Should be about 2 miles to the trailhead." I nodded, trying to shake off the unease that had been building since we'd left the main highway. The trees seemed to press closer to the road here, their October foliage creating a canopy so thick that afternoon felt like dusk. Sarah had been planning this trip for months, a 3-day backpacking excursion to celebrate our 2-year anniversary. She was the outdoorsy one in our relationship, always dragging me away from my computer screens and into nature. Usually, I complained, but this time I'd been looking forward to it. The stress from my job at the tech startup had been eating at me, and the idea of complete disconnection sounded perfect. "There," Sarah pointed to a weathered wooden sign barely visible through the undergrowth. "Jack's River Trailhead." The parking area was nothing more than a dirt clearing surrounded by towering oaks and maples. Our car was the only vehicle, which wasn't surprising given that it was a Wednesday in late October. Most people had the sense to avoid hiking in Georgia's mountains when the weather could turn without warning. Copper jumped out first, immediately investigating the perimeter of the clearing with the focused intensity only a dog could muster. Sarah emerged next, stretching her arms above her head and breathing deeply. "Smell that air, Mark. When's the last time you breathed something that wasn't filtered through an office building?" I had to admit it was refreshing. The scent of decomposing leaves mixed with pine and something earthier. The smell of a forest that had been left alone for decades. We spent the next hour organizing our gear, checking our supplies one final time. 3 days' worth of food, water purification tablets, first aid kit, sleeping bags rated for temperatures down to 20 degrees. Sarah had thought of everything. The trail began as a well-maintained path marked with white blazes painted on trees every 20 yards or so. For the first mile, it was almost pleasant. Copper trotted ahead of us, tail wagging, occasionally darting off to investigate interesting scents before bounding back to check on his humans. Sarah chatted about the history of the area, how the Cohutta Wilderness was one of the oldest protected forest areas in the southeast, how Cherokee had once lived in these mountains before being forced out in the 1830s. The locals say the Cherokee left behind more than just artifacts, she said, adjusting her pack straps. Supposedly, there are places in these mountains where time doesn't work right, where people have walked in circles for hours trying to find their way back to familiar landmarks. Sounds like tourism board marketing, I replied, though something about the way she said it made my skin prickle. The trail began to climb more steeply as we moved deeper into the wilderness. The well-maintained path gave way to something rougher, older. The blazes became less frequent, and more than once we had to stop and search for the next marker. By late afternoon, we'd covered about 6 miles and my legs were starting to protest. Sarah, of course, looked like she could hike another 10 miles without breaking a sweat. "Camp should be just over this ridge," she said, consulting the map again. "There's supposed to be a clearing near a stream." But when we crested the ridge, there was no clearing, no stream, just more dense forest stretching endlessly in every direction. Sarah frowned at the map, rotating it in her hands. "That's weird. GPS has us right here, but—" She pulled out her phone, but the screen showed no signal bars. "Guess we're really off the grid now." We backtracked about half a mile and found what looked like it might have once been a campsite. A roughly circular area where the trees were slightly less dense and the ground was relatively flat. It would have to do. As we set up our tent, I noticed Copper had stopped his usual exploring. Instead, he sat at the edge of our makeshift campsite, staring into the forest with his ears pricked forward. "What's got into him?" I asked. Sarah looked over. "Probably smells a deer or something. Copper, come here, boy." But Copper didn't move. His gaze remained fixed on something between the trees that I couldn't see. A low whine escaped his throat. Not his usual excited whimper, but something I'd never heard from him before. Something that sounded almost like distress. By the time we had camp set up, the sun was disappearing behind the mountains and the temperature was dropping fast. Sarah got our camp stove working and started heating water for our freeze-dried dinner while I gathered wood for a fire. The forest had gone completely silent. No birds, no insects, not even the rustle of small animals moving through the underbrush. Just the sound of our own movements and the occasional pop of heated metal from the camp stove. "Mark," Sarah's voice was tight, "look at this." I dropped the armload of branches I'd collected and walked over to where she was crouched by the stove. The flame, which should have been burning blue, was flickering between orange and green. As I watched, it briefly flared violet before settling back to a sickly yellow-green. "Stove must be malfunctioning," I said, though I'd never seen anything like it. "Maybe there's something wrong with the fuel mixture." Sarah nodded, but I could see she wasn't convinced. We ate our rehydrated pasta in uncomfortable silence as full darkness settled over the forest. I tried several times to get a fire started with the wood I'd gathered, but every time the flames would sputter and die, as if the wood was too green or wet, which was impossible since it had been a dry October and the branches I'd chosen were clearly dead and seasoned. "Forget the fire," Sarah said finally. "Sarah, we've got good sleeping bags. We'll be fine." But as we sat in our camp chairs, illuminated only by the weak glow of a battery-powered lantern, I didn't feel fine. The silence was wrong. Even in the deepest wilderness, there should have been some ambient sound. Owls, the distant howl of coyotes, the rustle of nocturnal creatures. This was the kind of absolute quiet that made your ears ring with phantom sounds. Copper had finally left his post at the edge of camp, but only to press himself against Sarah's legs. His whole body was trembling, and every few minutes he would whine softly and look toward the tree line. "Maybe we should head back tomorrow," I suggested. "Find a different area to explore." "Are you kidding? We just got here. It's probably just the weather making things feel weird. You know how atmospheric pressure can affect animals." Sarah had always been the rational one, finding logical explanations for things that made me uncomfortable. Usually, I appreciated that about her. Tonight, it felt like denial. We turned in around 10 o'clock, zipping ourselves into our sleeping bags inside the tent. Copper curled up between us, still trembling occasionally. I lay awake, listening to Sarah's breathing slowly deepen as she fell asleep. But sleep wouldn't come for me. Every time I started to drift off, I would hear something. A branch snapping, footsteps circling our tent, voices whispering just at the edge of audibility. At some point in the middle of the night, I was jolted awake by Copper's growling. It was a sound I'd never heard from him before. Deep, primal, the kind of growl that raised the hair on your arms. Sarah sat up beside me. "What is it, boy?" she whispered. Through the thin fabric of our tent, we could hear movement. Slow, deliberate footsteps circling our campsite. But the footsteps weren't quite right. The rhythm was off, like someone walking with a pronounced limp, or like someone trying to imitate the sound of walking without quite understanding how feet were supposed to hit the ground. The footsteps stopped directly outside our tent. We held our breath, listening. Then, in a voice that sounded almost like Sarah's but not quite, the pitch was wrong, the cadence too measured, came a whisper. "Sarah, come out, Sarah. I want to show you something." Sarah's hand found mine in the darkness and squeezed so hard I thought she might break my fingers. The voice came again, circling the tent. "Marcus, Sarah, such a beautiful night for a walk. The moon is so bright. Come see." But there was no moon. The night was completely overcast, black as the inside of a cave. We sat frozen for what felt like hours, listening to that thing circle our tent and call our names in voices that were almost our own. Copper had gone completely silent, pressed against the tent wall as far from the circling presence as he could get. Then, as suddenly as it had started, the footsteps stopped. The forest returned to its unnatural silence. We waited until dawn before emerging from the tent. In the morning light, everything looked normal. Almost normal. Our camp was exactly as we'd left it, except for one thing. The ashes from our failed attempts at making a fire the night before were gone. The fire ring we'd built was empty, as if we'd never tried to light anything at all. "We should go," I said. Sarah was examining the ground around our tent, looking for footprints or any sign of our nighttime visitor. "Look at this," she said, pointing to a section of soft earth near where we'd heard the footsteps stop. There were impressions in the dirt, but they weren't footprints. They were more like the marks you'd make if you pressed your hands into the ground, fingers splayed wide, and they were too large to be human hands. "Animal tracks," Sarah said, but her voice lacked conviction. "Maybe a bear walking on its hind legs." We broke camp quickly and started back down the trail. The plan had been to spend 2 more nights in the wilderness, but neither of us mentioned the change in itinerary. We just packed up and started walking. That's when we discovered our first real problem. The trail we'd followed up the mountain the day before was gone. Not overgrown, not blocked by fallen trees, simply gone. Where there had been a clear path marked with white blazes, there was now unbroken forest. "We must have gotten turned around," Sarah said, consulting her map and compass. "The trail has to be here somewhere." We spent 2 hours searching, walking in increasingly wide circles around where our campsite had been. Copper, who had been an enthusiastic trail dog the day before, now walked reluctantly, constantly looking over his shoulder and whining. "GPS," I said. "Check the GPS." Sarah pulled out her phone. The device showed we were in the middle of a blank area, not just without cell service, but as if the GPS satellites couldn't locate us at all. The screen showed our position as a question mark. "That's impossible," she muttered, shaking the phone as if that would fix it. By noon, we were lost. Truly, completely lost in a way that felt fundamentally wrong. We could see the ridge we'd camped on, could identify landmarks from the day before, but every attempt to navigate back to familiar territory led us in circles. Worse, the landscape itself seemed to be changing. Trees I was certain I'd seen before would disappear when I looked away and then back. Paths that seemed to lead downhill toward the valley would somehow curve back uphill after a few hundred yards. "We're walking in circles," I said after we passed the same distinctive lightning-struck oak for the 3rd time. "That's impossible. I've been marking our path." Sarah pointed to the small cairns of stone she'd been building every few hundred yards. "Look." I looked. The cairns were there, but they formed a perfect circle around the lightning-struck oak. We'd been walking in a literal circle for hours without realizing it. Sarah stared at the pattern of stones, her face pale. I was walking straight. I was following the compass. This doesn't make sense. That's when I noticed that Copper was missing. He'd been right behind us when we'd stopped to examine the cairns, but now he was nowhere to be seen. We called his name, listened for the sound of him crashing through the underbrush, but heard nothing. "Copper!" Sarah's voice echoed strangely in the still air, as if the sound was being absorbed by the trees before it could travel very far. "Here, boy." We searched for 2 hours, our calls becoming increasingly desperate. Dogs didn't just vanish. Copper was well-trained, loyal, and had never wandered off before, but it was as if he'd simply ceased to exist. As we searched, I began to notice things that made my skin crawl. The forest was too neat, too organized. Trees grew in almost perfect rows in some places. Fallen logs were arranged in patterns that looked too deliberate to be natural. And everywhere, there were those handprint impressions in the soft earth, always near the base of trees, always pointing deeper into the forest. "Something's not right here," I said finally. Sarah had been holding herself together through sheer force of will, but I could see cracks forming in her composure. "Animals get lost too," she said. "He probably just got confused by the terrain. We'll find him." But even as she said it, I could hear the doubt in her voice. As afternoon faded toward evening, we heard barking in the distance. Sarah's face lit up with relief. "That's him! Copper!" We ran toward the sound, crashing through undergrowth and low-hanging branches. The barking grew louder, more frantic. It was definitely Copper. I'd recognize his voice anywhere. But something about the sound was off. The rhythm was wrong, too regular, like a recording being played on loop. We found him in a small clearing, standing perfectly still and barking at the sky. His tail wasn't wagging. His body was rigid, mechanical. And his eyes were completely white, rolled back so far that no iris was visible. "Copper?" Sarah approached him slowly. "Boy, what's wrong?" The barking stopped abruptly. Copper's head turned toward us with a movement that was too fluid, too smooth. When he looked at us, his eyes were normal again, brown and familiar. His tail began to wag. "There you are," Sarah said, relief flooding her voice. "We were so worried." But I wasn't relieved. I was terrified, because Copper was looking at us. But he wasn't seeing us. His gaze was focused on something just to our left, as if Sarah and I were slightly to the side of where we actually stood. "Sarah," I said quietly, "don't touch him." "Don't be ridiculous." She reached out to pet Copper's head, and he nuzzled against her hand just like he always did. "See? He's fine, just got a little spooked." But as we started walking again, Copper following at his usual position just behind Sarah's left heel, I noticed that he wasn't leaving footprints. The soft earth that clearly showed our boot impressions remained unmarked where his paws should have been. Night was falling again, and we were no closer to finding our way out of the wilderness. Worse, I was beginning to suspect that we weren't in the Cohuta wilderness anymore. The topography was all wrong. Too many hills, too many valleys, landscape that folded in on itself in ways that hurt to think about. We made camp in another clearing, this one dominated by a massive oak tree whose branches formed an almost perfect circle overhead. Our second attempt at a fire was more successful, though the flames still flickered with those strange colors, green and violet and orange. Sarah seemed to be handling the situation better than I was. She chatted normally as we ate another meal of rehydrated camping food, made jokes about our adventure, and even played fetch with Copper using a stick she'd found. But I couldn't stop watching Copper, couldn't shake the feeling that the thing playing with Sarah wasn't our dog. The real test came when Sarah pulled out a bag of Copper's favorite treats, bacon-flavored training rewards that would normally send him into paroxysms of excitement. She held one out to him and he took it politely, chewed it, and swallowed without any of his usual enthusiasm. No drooling, no begging for more, no happy dance. Just mechanical eating, like he was going through the motions of being a dog without understanding what it meant. "He's just tired," Sarah said when I pointed this out. "It's been a stressful day." But I could see the doubt starting to creep into her eyes, too. That night, we took turns keeping watch. Sarah took the first shift while I tried to sleep. But sleep was impossible. I lay in my sleeping bag listening to the sounds of the forest, sounds that hadn't been there the night before. Whispers in languages I didn't recognize, the soft thud of footsteps that stopped whenever I held my breath to listen more carefully, and underneath it all, a low humming that seemed to come from the earth itself. During Sarah's watch, I heard her talking to Copper in low tones. "You're acting so strange. Boy, what happened to you out there?" I opened my eyes and saw her silhouette against the dying fire, one hand extended toward where Copper should have been lying. But there was nothing there. Sarah was petting empty air. "Sarah," I whispered. She turned toward me, and in the firelight I could see that her eyes were white, rolled back just like Copper's had been earlier. "He's such a good dog," she said in a voice that was almost hers. "Such a very good dog. He never strays far from the path." I sat up slowly, my heart hammering. "Sarah, look at me." Her head tilted at an unnatural angle. "Marcus, is something wrong?" Her eyes were normal again, brown and concerned. She looked down at her hand, still extended toward empty space, and jerked it back as if she'd been burned. "Where's Copper?" she asked. I looked around the camp. Our dog was nowhere to be seen. Again. "He was right here," Sarah said, confusion thick in her voice. "I was just petting him. He was right here." We found Copper the next morning, or something that looked like Copper. He was sitting at the edge of our camp, staring into the forest with that same rigid posture. When we approached, he turned and looked at us with eyes that were brown and familiar but somehow empty. "We're leaving," I said. "Right now, we're walking downhill until we hit a road or a stream or civilization." Sarah nodded. The pretense that this was a normal camping trip had finally cracked. We broke camp in record time and started walking, choosing the steepest downhill slope we could find and following it religiously. But the slope didn't lead down. After an hour of walking what felt like a steep descent, we found ourselves at the top of a ridge higher than any we'd climbed the day before. The forest stretched endlessly in all directions, and in the distance, I could see our campsite from the night before. "That's impossible," Sarah breathed. But it wasn't impossible. It was just wrong in a way that made my brain hurt to contemplate. We tried again, choosing a different direction. This time, we walked for 3 hours, making sure to head consistently downhill, marking our path, double-checking our compass. At the end of those 3 hours, we were back at the lightning-struck oak with its circle of cairns. "We're trapped," Sarah said, and for the first time since this nightmare began, I heard real fear in her voice. That's when Copper started talking. Not barking, not whining, talking. In a voice that was almost human but not quite, like someone who had learned to speak by listening to recordings without understanding what the words meant. "Sarah," he said, "Marcus, beautiful day for walking. Such beautiful trees. Such beautiful friends." Sarah screamed. It was a sound I'd never heard from her before, primal and terrified. Copper, the thing that looked like Copper, tilted its head and continued speaking in that wrong voice. "Why are you frightened, Sarah? We are having such a nice time. Such a very nice camping trip, just like you wanted." "That's not Copper," I said, grabbing Sarah's arm. "That's not our dog." The thing that looked like our dog smiled. Dogs can't smile, not really, but this thing had learned to arrange its facial muscles in an approximation of human expression. The result was grotesque. Too many teeth, lips pulled back too far, eyes that didn't crinkle at the corners the way they should. "Of course I am Copper," it said. "Good dog Copper. never strays from the path. Sarah was hyperventilating. I put my arms around her, trying to offer comfort while my own mind reeled with the impossibility of what we were witnessing. "What are you?" I asked the thing. "I am Copper," it repeated. "Sarah's dog, Marcus's dog, good dog." "What happened to our real dog?" The smile widened. "There is no real dog. There is only Copper. There has always been only Copper." But that was wrong. And I knew it was wrong because I had 17 years of memories with the real Copper. I remembered the day we'd adopted him from the shelter, remembered house training him, remembered the way he used to steal socks from the laundry basket and hide them under his bed. Except, as I tried to focus on those memories, they became fuzzy around the edges. Had we really had Copper for 17 years? That would make him ancient for a golden retriever. When had we adopted him? Where had we lived when he was a puppy? The harder I tried to remember, the more the memories slipped away, like trying to hold water in my cupped hands. "You're messing with our heads," I said. "I am not messing," the thing said. "I am Copper. We are camping. This is fun." "Sarah," I said, "we need to get out of here. Now." But when I turned to look at her, Sarah was smiling the same wrong smile as the thing that looked like our dog. "But Marcus," she said in a voice that was almost hers, "we're having such a nice time. Such a beautiful camping trip. Just like I always wanted." I backed away from both of them. Sarah's eyes were brown and familiar, but there was something moving behind them. Something that wasn't Sarah looking out through her face. "Who are you?" I demanded. "I am Sarah," she said. "Your girlfriend Sarah. We have been together for 2 years. We love hiking and camping and spending time in nature." The facts were right, but the delivery was wrong. Too formal, like someone reciting information they'd memorized rather than lived. "What's my favorite food?" I asked. Sarah tilted her head, and for a moment her expression went completely blank. Then the smile returned. "You love food, Marcus. All kinds of food. Food is very important for camping trips." I ran. I crashed through the forest, branches tearing at my clothes and face, following no path, caring only about putting distance between myself and the things that were wearing the faces of the 2 beings I loved most in the world. Behind me, I could hear them calling, "Marcus! Come back, Marcus! We are worried about you." But underneath their voices, almost inaudible, I could hear something else. A sound like laughter, but not human laughter. Something that found great amusement in my terror. I ran until my lungs burned and my legs gave out, finally collapsing against the base of a massive pine tree. When I caught my breath enough to listen, the forest was silent again. No footsteps following me, no voices calling my name. For the first time in 2 days, I was completely alone. I tried to think rationally about my situation. I was lost in the woods with no supplies, no water, and no way to navigate. Sarah and Copper were either dead, possessed, or had never existed in the first place, and I was no longer certain which possibility scared me more. But at least I was thinking clearly for the first time since we'd made camp that first night. Whatever was happening in this place, it seemed to work by replacing things gradually, making you doubt your own perceptions until you accepted the replacements as real. I needed to get out, and I needed to do it without following any established paths, without trusting any landmarks, without relying on anything that might be part of the trap. I looked up. Through the canopy, I could see a patch of sky. If I could keep the sun in sight, I could maintain a sense of direction. The sun set in the west, so if I kept it to my right as evening approached, I'd be heading roughly south. Eventually, I'd have to hit a road or a stream or some sign of human civilization. I started walking, ignoring the paths that seemed to appear temptingly in my peripheral vision, ignoring the familiar landmarks that beckoned from between the trees. When I heard voices calling my name, and I heard them frequently, I walked in the opposite direction. Hours passed. The sun moved across the sky as it should, which was reassuring. My stomach cramped with hunger, and my throat was raw with thirst, but I kept walking. As afternoon faded toward evening, I began to smell something wonderful, the scent of cooking food drifting through the trees. I followed the smell to a small clearing where a campfire burned cheerfully. Sarah sat beside it, tending a pot of what looked like real food. Not freeze-dried camping meals, but actual stew with meat and vegetables. She looked up when I emerged from the tree line. "There you are," she said, and her voice was exactly right this time, warm with relief and tinged with exasperation. "I've been looking everywhere for you. Where did you go?" For a moment, I almost believed it. The Sarah sitting by the fire looked exactly like my girlfriend, sounded exactly like her, even had the same small scar on her chin from a childhood accident. But I forced myself to remember what I'd seen, what I'd heard. "Where's Copper?" I asked. "He's fine," Sarah said, "just sleeping in the tent. Poor guy's exhausted from all this hiking." She gestured toward a tent that was set up at the far edge of the clearing. Our tent, identical in every detail to the one we'd been sharing for the past 2 nights. "Come sit down," Sarah continued. "You look terrible. When did you last eat?" The smell of the stew was making my mouth water. My stomach contracted painfully, reminding me that I hadn't eaten since that morning. It would be so easy to sit down, to accept this version of reality, to pretend that everything was normal. Instead, I picked up a rock. "Marcus?" Sarah's expression shifted to concern. "What are you doing?" "If you're really Sarah," I said, "then you'll know why I have to do this." I threw the rock as hard as I could at the tent. It struck the fabric and passed right through as if the tent was made of mist rather than nylon. The rock landed in the dirt on the other side and the tent didn't even ripple. The thing that looked like Sarah stood up slowly. Its expression didn't change, but something shifted behind its eyes. "That was not very nice, Marcus," it said. "Where is she?" I demanded. "Where's the real Sarah?" "I am the real Sarah," it said, but its voice was flattening out, becoming less human with each word. "I have always..." My name is Sarah Mitchell, and I am 28 years old. This happened in October 2023. The GPS died first. Not the battery. The whole unit just went black while we were still 20 minutes out from Jack's River Falls, deep in the Cohutta wilderness of North Georgia. Marcus cursed under his breath, shaking the device like that would bring it back to life. "Technology," he muttered, stuffing it back into his pack. "This is why I brought the paper maps." I watched him unfold the topographical map, his brow furrowing as he traced our route with his finger. We'd been hiking for 3 hours already, following what should have been a well-marked trail through the dense hardwood forest. The October air was crisp, filled with the earthy scent of decomposing leaves and the distant sound of rushing water. "Everything okay?" I asked, though I could see the confusion in his eyes. Marcus had been my hiking partner for 2 years now. We'd met at a rock climbing gym in Atlanta, bonded over our shared love of the outdoors and our mutual need to escape the suffocating corporate world. He was methodical, careful, the kind of person who triple-checked gear and always had backup plans, which is why his current expression worried me. "The trail markers," he said slowly, "they don't match what's on the map." I looked around. The white blazes on the trees seemed normal enough, though now that he mentioned it, they did appear freshly painted. Too fresh for a trail that supposedly got regular maintenance. "Maybe they just updated the route," I suggested, though something cold was beginning to settle in my stomach. Our friend Jake emerged from behind a massive oak tree, zipping up his pants. "What's the holdup?" he called out, his voice echoing strangely in the thick forest. Jake was our opposite in every way. Impulsive, loud, the kind of guy who'd suggest cliff jumping after 3 beers. But he was loyal, and his infectious energy usually kept our spirits up during the tough parts of a hike. "GPS is dead, and the trail markers don't match the map," Marcus explained. Jake jogged over, his heavy boots crunching through the carpet of leaves. "So, we've got like 6 hours of daylight left. How hard can it be to find a waterfall?" That's when we heard it. A sound like wind chimes, but wrong somehow. Too metallic, too discordant. It seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere, echoing off the trees in a way that made my skin crawl. What the hell was that? Jake's bravado faltered slightly. Marcus was already shouldering his pack. Probably just whined through some old fence wire or something. Come on, let's keep moving. But as we continued down the trail, if it even was a trail anymore, I couldn't shake the feeling that the sound had been deliberate, like a signal. The forest began to change around us. The familiar hardwoods gave way to something older, more twisted. The trees grew closer together, their branches interlocking overhead in a canopy so thick that noon felt like dusk. The air grew heavy and still, carrying scents that didn't belong. Sulfur, wet concrete, something sweetly rotten that reminded me of funeral flowers. "Are you guys feeling this?" I asked, pausing to catch my breath. My chest felt tight, like someone was sitting on my rib cage. Marcus nodded, wiping sweat from his forehead despite the cool temperature. "Altitude, maybe? We've been climbing steadily." But I'd been hiking in these mountains for years. This wasn't altitude sickness. This was something else entirely. Jake had wandered ahead, following what looked like deer tracks. "Hey," he called back. "I think I found something." We caught up to find him standing at the edge of a small clearing. In the center sat the remains of what might have once been a cabin. The roof had long since collapsed, and the walls were little more than rotting timber and rusted metal sheets. But it was what surrounded the structure that made my blood run cold. Dozens of small objects hung from the tree branches. At first glance, they looked like wind chimes or dream catchers. But as we drew closer, I could see they were made from bones. Tiny bones, arranged in intricate patterns and suspended by what looked like human hair. "Okay, that's definitely not on the tourist maps," Jake said, his voice barely above a whisper. Marcus pulled out his phone to take pictures, but the screen remained black. "Battery's dead," he said, frowning. "It was at 80% when we started." I checked mine. Same thing. The phone was completely unresponsive, as if something had just drained the life from it. "We should go," I said, backing away from the bone chimes. They were moving now despite the complete absence of wind, creating that same discordant melody we'd heard earlier. "Wait," Marcus said, moving toward the ruined cabin. "Look at this." On what remained of the front door, someone had carved symbols deep into the wood. They weren't letters from any alphabet I recognized, but somehow they seemed familiar, like something from a half-remembered nightmare. Jake had moved to the other side of the clearing, examining more bone arrangements. "Guys," he called out, his voice strained, "I think some of these are fresh." I forced myself to look closer at the chimes nearest to me. The bones were white, cleaned, but there were still fragments of tissue clinging to some of them, and the hair, long, brown, with what looked like a barrette still attached. "We're leaving. Now." I turned to go, but Marcus grabbed my arm. "Sarah, look at the trees." I followed his gaze upward and felt my knees go weak. Carved into the bark of every tree surrounding the clearing were the same symbols from the door. But these weren't old. The bark was still bleeding sap, the cuts so fresh they looked wet. "Someone's been here recently," Marcus whispered. "Someone's watching us." That's when Jake screamed. We spun around to find him on his knees beside the cabin, his hands clawing at his face. Blood was streaming between his fingers and his whole body was convulsing like he was having a seizure. "Jake!" I ran toward him, but Marcus caught my arm. "Don't," he said, his voice deadly serious. "Look at his eyes." I stopped, my heart hammering against my ribs. Jake's hands had fallen away from his face, and I could see what Marcus meant. Jake's eyes were completely white, not rolled back, but white, as if someone had poured milk into the sockets. And he was smiling, a wide, inappropriate grin that didn't belong on his face. "Jake?" My voice came out as a croak. He turned his head toward us with mechanical precision, that horrible smile never wavering. When he spoke, his voice was Jake's, but the cadence was all wrong. "The woman wants to meet you," he said, each word delivered with the same inflection, like he was reading from a script. She's been waiting so very long. Marcus stepped protectively in front of me, pulling a knife from his belt. That's not Jake. Jake, or whatever was wearing Jake's face, stood up with jerky, puppet-like movements. His white eyes fixed on something behind us, and his smile grew even wider. "She's here now," he said. I turned, and every rational thought in my head simply evaporated. Standing at the edge of the clearing was a woman, if you could call her that. She might have been beautiful once, but time and something far worse had twisted her into something else entirely. Her skin was the color of old parchment, stretched tight over a skull that was just slightly too large. Her hair hung in long, matted ropes that moved independently of any breeze, and her fingernails had grown into claws that curved like yellow sickles. But it was her eyes that made me understand, on a primal level, that we were going to die here. They were ancient, filled with a hunger that had been growing for decades, maybe centuries, and they were looking right at me. "Pretty little things," she said, and her voice was like grinding stone. "It's been so long since anyone found their way to my home." Marcus raised his knife, but the woman just laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "Iron," she said, amused. "How quaint." She gestured, and Marcus's knife flew from his hand, embedding itself in a tree 20 feet away. Then she gestured again, and Marcus began walking toward her, his movements as jerky and wrong as Jake's had been. "Marcus!" I screamed, but he couldn't hear me. His eyes had gone white, and that same mechanical smile was spreading across his face. I ran. I crashed through the forest blindly, branches tearing at my clothes and skin. Behind me, I could hear laughter, the woman's and now Jake's and Marcus's voices joining in, creating a chorus of insane mirth that echoed through the trees. I ran until my lungs burned and my legs gave out, collapsing beside a stream I didn't remember crossing. The water was black, reflecting nothing, and it smelled like copper pennies and rotting meat. That's when I realized I was completely lost. The trail was gone. The mountains around me didn't look like anything I'd seen in Georgia. The trees were wrong, twisted into shapes that hurt to look at, their bark weeping something that wasn't sap. I pulled out my compass, but the needle spun wildly before settling on a direction that couldn't exist. My watch had stopped at 3:33, though I couldn't remember what time we'd entered the clearing. As night fell, too quickly, as if someone had simply turned off the sun, I heard them calling my name. "Sarah," Jake's voice drifted through the darkness. "Sarah, where are you? We're worried about you." But Jake's voice was coming from 3 different directions at once, and underneath his words, I could hear that grinding stone laughter. "Sarah," Marcus called from somewhere behind me, "I'm hurt. I need help." I covered my ears and squeezed my eyes shut, but the voices kept coming, closer now. "Sarah," the woman said, and she was right beside me. "Look at me, child." I opened my eyes and saw her crouched next to the black stream, her clawed hands dipped in the water. Where her skin touched the surface, the liquid began to glow with a sickly green light. "Your friends are waiting," she said conversationally. "They're very eager to see you again. They have so much to tell you about what they've learned." In the green glow, I could see shapes moving beneath the water. Bodies, dozens of them, all perfectly preserved and all staring up at me with white, empty eyes. "This is my pantry," the woman explained, following my gaze. "I keep them fresh here, in case I get hungry between visitors. Would you like to see your friends? They're already settling in nicely." The shapes in the water began to rise, breaking the surface with wet, gasping sounds. I saw Jake first, his skin pale and bloated, that mechanical smile still fixed on his face. Then Marcus, his eyes like white marbles, his mouth opening and closing like a fish. "Sarah," they said in unison, water pouring from their mouths. "Come swim with us. The water's lovely." I scrambled backward, but the woman was suddenly behind me, her claws digging into my shoulders. "Don't be afraid," she whispered in my ear, her breath like grave dirt. "It only hurts for a moment. then you'll understand everything." Her claws began to pierce my skin, and I felt something cold and foreign trying to push its way into my mind. Images flashed behind my eyes, centuries of hikers and hunters who had stumbled into this place, all of them joining the collection in the black stream, all of them becoming puppets for this thing that wore the shape of a woman. But then I remembered something. The knife. Marcus's knife embedded in the tree. The woman was old, powerful, but she was also overconfident. She'd been doing this for so long that she'd forgotten to be careful. As her claws dug deeper, trying to hollow out my mind and fill it with her will, I let my body go limp. "That's right," she cooed. "Just let go. It's so much easier." Instead, I drove my elbow back as hard as I could, catching her in what I hoped was still a vulnerable spot. She shrieked and staggered backward, and I rolled away, coming up running. I crashed back through the forest, following the sound of that grinding stone scream. If she was behind me, then the clearing was ahead. And in the clearing was the knife. I burst through the tree line to find Jake and Marcus standing exactly where I'd left them, their white eyes tracking my movement. They moved to intercept me, but their puppet-like movements were slow and predictable. I dodged between them, diving for the tree where the knife was embedded. The blade came free easily, as if it had been waiting for me. Behind me, the woman emerged from the forest, her face twisted with rage. "Iron won't save you," she snarled. "Nothing can save you now." But as she lunged forward, I noticed something. The bone chimes around the clearing were all perfectly still, despite her movement creating wind, and the symbols carved into the trees, they were bleeding more heavily now, as if responding to her proximity. She wasn't just using this place, she was bound to it. I turned and ran for the largest tree, the one with the deepest carving. The woman pursued, but as I pressed the iron blade against the bleeding symbol, she stopped as if she'd hit an invisible wall. "No," she whispered, and for the first time, there was fear in her ancient eyes. I began to cut, carving through the symbol with Marcus's knife. The blade grew hot in my hand, but I kept cutting, gouging deeper and deeper into the wood. The woman's scream rose to a pitch that made my ears bleed, and around the clearing, the bone chimes began to shatter, falling to the ground in a rain of calcium and hair. Jake and Marcus collapsed, their eyes rolling back to normal as whatever had been controlling them fled. The woman herself began to fade, becoming translucent, then transparent, then nothing at all. But her voice lingered, echoing through the forest. "This isn't over, child. Others will come. Others will find their way here, and I'll be waiting." The symbols on all the trees went dark. The bleeding stopped, and suddenly the forest around us looked normal again. Oak and hickory and maple, exactly what should be growing in the Georgia mountains. My compass needle swung to true north, and in the distance I could hear the sound of rushing water. Jack's River Falls. We'd been heading in the right direction all along. Marcus was the first to wake up, blinking in confusion. "Sarah, what happened?" "The last thing I remember." "The clearing," I said, helping him sit up. "Do you remember the clearing?" He looked around, frowning. We were still in the same spot, but now it just looked like any other patch of forest. No ruined cabin, no bone chimes, no symbols carved into trees. Even the black stream was gone, replaced by a perfectly normal creek running clear over moss-covered stones. Jake groaned and sat up, holding his head. "Did someone hit me with a truck? I feel like I've been dead for a week." "Something like that," I said, not sure how to explain what had really happened. Did I even understand it myself? We made it to the waterfall before sunset, set up camp, and spent the night taking turns staying awake. None of us talked about what we'd experienced, but I caught both Marcus and Jake staring into the fire with haunted expressions. The next morning, we hiked out without incident. Our phones worked perfectly, the GPS came back online, and the trail markers matched the map exactly. It was as if the previous day had been some kind of shared hallucination. But I still have Marcus's knife. The blade is permanently stained black now, no matter how much I clean it. And sometimes, late at night, I swear I can hear that grinding stone laughter carried on the wind. I've done research since then. Spent hours in the Georgia Historical Archives looking for any record of disappearances in the Cohutta Wilderness. What I found chilled me to the bone. Going back to the 1800s, there are reports of hikers, hunters, and settlers who vanished without a trace in that area. Always in groups of 2 or 3, always with their equipment left behind, as if they'd simply walked away from their lives. The most recent report was filed just 2 weeks before our trip. A family of 4 from Tennessee, experienced campers, had planned a 3-day hiking trip to Jacks River Falls. The Park Service found their car in the trailhead parking lot, but no trace of the family was ever discovered. But here's what really keeps me awake at night. In every single report, going back over a century, there's mention of strange sounds in the forest. Sounds like wind chimes, discordant and wrong. And in several of the more recent reports, hikers reported GPS malfunctions and trail markers that didn't match their maps. The thing in the forest, the woman, or whatever she really was, she's still there, still waiting, still collecting. I've tried to warn people, posted on hiking forums, contacted the Park Service, even tried talking to local law enforcement. But who's going to believe a story about an ancient witch who turns people into puppets and stores them in a supernatural stream? They all think I suffered from altitude sickness or ate some bad mushrooms. So I'm telling you this story instead, hoping that maybe someone will listen. If you're planning to hike in the Cohutta Wilderness, please be careful. If your GPS dies for no reason, if the trail markers don't match your map, if you hear sounds like wind chimes coming from the trees, turn around and leave immediately. Don't investigate. Don't try to be brave. Just run and don't look back. Because the woman is still there, waiting in her clearing that exists between spaces, surrounded by the bones of everyone who came before you. And she's always hungry for new friends to add to her collection. Marcus and Jake think they're fine, but I see the way they stare into fires now. I see how they both jump at unexpected sounds, how they've both started checking locks twice and looking over their shoulders in empty rooms. Something followed us out of those woods. Something small but growing, like a seed planted in fertile ground. Sometimes I catch one of them staring at me with an expression that's almost familiar, like they're waiting for me to do something, or become something. Their eyes haven't gone white again, but sometimes, in the right light, they look just a little too bright. And late at night, when I'm lying in bed listening to the wind in the trees outside my apartment, I swear I can hear that grinding stone laughter. Not from the forest, but from somewhere much closer. From the apartment next door, where Marcus lives. From the house across the street, where Jake moved last month. Getting closer. Always getting closer. My name is Sarah Mitchell, and I am 28 years old. This happened in October 2023, and I think it's still happening.